Hey everyone, happy Friday. Friday before Christmas. If you celebrate, you're probably running around like crazy. I today need to make a few cards to go in with the fudge that I made and cookies. And it has to be easy, it has to be fast. This is both easy and fast. Anybody can do it, and it just adds, I love it when I get something handmade for Christmas. We're going to use a ball stamp. We're going to use my Kuretake Nouveau paints and one other, a dark red, because there's no dark red in this particular palette. I'm going to put them on postcards, poke a hole in them, put a nice ribbon through it, and attach it to the cookies. So I hope you like this, and I hope you're taking some time to enjoy the build up and all the fun things that go along with the holidays as well. All right, so we're starting with the Kuretake Art Nouveau set of paints that I got at Dick Blick. They have a beautiful variety of greens in this particular palette. Also, this digital download is available for free in my Stan store. I will put a link below so you can get the starting point for this painting to paint with at home. So we're starting with a very light yellowy green. If you're not painting with this palette, just use a light yellow green. As you know, in watercolors, it is best to work light to dark. And so we start with a very light yellow, and I'm going back in with a darker green along the main stem of the pine branch. And I'm also kind of going over trying to put some more needles in there without completely covering the light yellow needles underneath. I love doing pine branches. They're so easy. I'm using a very tiny etcher brush. You should use like a size 1 or 2 small round. And there's a Princeton brush that I love, and I love this etcher brush because it's a little bit more, it's not very soft, it's very springy. So it is really helpful. Play around with the brushes that you have, because you'll notice when you're doing a test run with your needles, different brushes, different manufacturers react differently when you're doing these. So you just want something with a little spring in it that has a very nice point at the end. And you go along the main stem and then very lightly make little strokes out from the main stem for the little needles. It's really simple, really, really simple. And if you've never painted these before, I think you'll have fun. So now what I want to do is mix a decent variety of greens. I don't want only 2 greens in this painting. If you see, this Kuretake palette has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 greens in it. It's a wonderful palette to use for this, and I really love it. So I'm jumping around between some of the lighter greens and the darker greens. So we're doing the left branch and then the right branch. And now we are going to use a little bit of the limeish green, and I'm just scuffling in lightly some light yellowy green. And we're going to go back in wet on wet with that and just drop in some dark spaces. It's kind of, I want it to kind of look like moss. It is not supposed to look like the pine needles. And so I start with the very light yellow green, go in with a more Christmas green, and it's very, just kind of move your brush around so that you are creating little pockets of darker color within the light color. And a little more light green. And you can see there's a little candle in the middle there that I'm excited to paint. And then we'll go in at the very end with, my brush is not wet enough, a little more water and little dots of dark green. And I use this same tiny brush to do the whole painting. Um, it's a tiny piece of paper. The postcard that I'm working on is an Etcher Lab postcard, 100% cotton. And I just love these. They're tiny. They have a little postcard thing on the back, an address and a little stamp area. But these are really cute. They're so tiny that you can just poke a hole in them and add them to a plate of cookies like a gift card, or like a greeting card size, but a little bit smaller. Now we're going in with dark green underneath the berries because the candle is above it and it's casting light on the top of the berries. So it's a good idea to darken underneath where the light would not hit. And I'm saving the middle to do another little pine bough here in the middle. And let's see, we'll get this one in the middle and start with some light yellow. And I'm sorry, sometimes I forget with my hand to move it to the left. I'm trying to make it so you can see the brush strokes on everything. But we're doing just little tiny, flicks of your brush from the center out. And we're going to go back in the middle with some dark green right up the main stem. And because it's still wet, it'll run a little bit out into the light yellow. It gives it a nice, beautiful effect on the pine needles. And then I like to go over and put in full-size dark pine needles mixed in with it. It's just the more variety of color you can give it, the more realistic it's going to look. It'll look less flat when you have a combination of lighter greens and darker greens. And now we're just dropping in a little more of the dark green around the berries before we fill those in. And use a light touch when you're doing your pine needles. It's very, the very tip of the brush and very light. And we're adding another little pine branch coming up the left. And I'm liking the way that greenery is. You've got a nice variety of greens. Back up the middle. Now we're going to do the flame of the candle. And I'm using the very lightest yellow that's in this palette and doing the actual flame first. And then I'm going to grab a little bit darker yellow from a different palette. This palette, the top yellow color there is a little bit too green. So I'm going with like a cadmium yellow from my other palette that's above it. And now we're going to use the beautiful berry red that's in this palette. And I'm going to go slow on the first berries and then speed up the next ones because I am painfully slow at painting berries. Circles can be difficult in that you want to take your time with them because the faster you go, or the faster I go, the more deformed the berry shape becomes. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and they end up looking like apples. So I go very slow when I'm filling in these berries. and try to maintain the original circle that is sketched in there. And then you're going to go in with some darker red. And again, I pulled that also off of my Sennelier palette, because there is not a darker red in this Art Nouveau palette. But you can use any, dark cranberry red. And you're going to go in wet on wet and drop more pigment. Make sure your brush isn't soaking wet when you do this. Get your brush wet, uh, get some darker color in it, and then tap it dry. Get a little bit of the water out, because if you put a super watery dark mix into that, it's just going to mess up the shape and not crawl slowly into the red like you want it to do. So I'm speeding this up because, as I told you, I'm painfully slow on um, circles and berries. So we're going in with the very bright red and then coming back in with a darker red in kind of a U around the bottom and around the other ones. And the other ones, I did it around the top of that berry because it's getting shadow from the berry that's above it, so, or next to it. And now I'm going to slow it down again and come back in with some, well, that's some dark red. Just makes it look so much more realistic. We're going to get back into our greens. Now you could leave it the way that it is, but I would like to, around the outside of the ball jar, add a little more greenery. Just kind of frames it a little bit. And if you did leave it like this, you could. There are pine needles that look like this, or pine branches. I prefer to fill them in a little fuller. So I'm going to go back in. Now, I was going to put some brown on the branch. That color on my Kuretake palette is too yellow, so I'm going back in with the deeper reddish color that's at the bottom left. And I'm going to go in and make this look a little bit more like a branch. Because, when you have pine branches, they're usually not green. They're usually brown with some little bit of, yellow and light brown. And so I wanted to make these look a little more realistic. I think that just makes it look more like a real pine branch. And then we're going to do a little tiny one on the other side. And just little tiny needles. You can kind of take your time with this too, or you end up crossing the middle branch and then it doesn't look as good. So just take your time and put those needles in. And a few more here. I find I'm never done with pine needles. I just keep adding them. I don't know. I mean, I think it looks a little more realistic the more needles that I add. There is a point where you can do too many though, where then there is no more white space in there. So it's a fine line. Huh? No pun intended. It is a fine line that you're painting, but it's a fine line of going overboard with the needles as well. So now I'm going with a darker green, darker than the first two that were on there. There. All right. And a few more needles on the right. And if you like them more sparse, then leave them more sparse. It's all how your personal preference when you're painting this. Now I have a silver pen. I could have painted this with a silver paintbrush. Um, but I love this little silver pen that I have. And so I thought, well, it would be easier to just ink this part in. It's the little part of the votive candle, you know, the little silver part at the bottom. You can paint this in with silver paint if you want to. I just find that this particular pen, it comes out nice and thick, and I wouldn't have to go over it a couple of times. Sometimes with watercolor, the silver, you have to go over 2 or 3 times to get it to look like you want it to. And then take, if you have a pen, and go around the rim of the votive candle just to bring that silver around the back. And then I always end up playing with the oval to try to make it as perfectly oval as you can, perfectly imperfect. And now I'm adding just a little bit of blue under where the wick is, because it was just looking a little flat and not realistic to me. And a little more blue just to give it a little base there. And now I probably should have switched to a bigger brush, but I didn't. This one seemed to work fine for most of it. I'm going around the flame of the candle because I want to add a little bit of a yellow glow in there. So I'm going around with just plain water and actually touching up against the flame because hoping it'll run a little bit, some of the color from the flame. And then I'm taking the light yellow and going around. I didn't get enough. Going around the flame just to add a nice kind of glowy touch. Oh, I like that so much better. And then I'm going to fiddle with it a little bit, adding a little more yellow, and then cleaning my brush and going around the edges with just water. There's no paint in that brush, to just kind of tickle the paint out a little bit more without it being obvious. And so I'm kind of lightly going around that, taking it out as far as I'd like the pigment to travel. And it just gives it a nice, very soft glow. And I tried to come back in with a little bit more of the cadmium yellow. I got a little bit too much there, which annoyed me a little bit, but now I'm going to clean my brush and just kind of move that darker pigment around so that it didn't look like a big blob there. And I actually ended up quite happy. Sometimes you have happy accidents when you're painting. I'm glad that I blobbed that other paint there because it ended up being a much better color at the end. I enjoy that a little more. And I think it looks a little more authentic. And now I'm taking a gold pen and I wanted to put some gold berries in there, but this gold pen is kind of blah. So I switched to my other gold pen right there. And this gold is a little bit shinier, a little bit lighter. Like there are a bunch of shades of green, there are also a bunch of shades of gold. So now on the top, I could have left this plain, but I'm going to fill it in to be like a gold lid. I just like the balance with the berries on the bottom. You could make it a silver lid if you want to, or you could just leave it clear, like it's not a lid and it's just the outline of the bottle. But I'm going to go very slowly. I am better with a paintbrush than I am with a pen. Pens I'm super careful with. They just are a little less manageable to me than a brush. But again, it comes out in this real strong, solid gold, and I won't have to paint over it and over it to get it to the depth that I like. Now, I don't want to paint the lid and the little part in the middle in the same gold. So I'm going back to my darker gold, or it's kind of a yellower gold. And I like it because it actually looks to me like the glow of the candle back there. So I'm happy with that. And now we're going to go in and put a very light shadow under the ball jar, because while I could leave it floating, using it for a Christmas card, I I just don't feel like it's finished when it's floating there. So I like to put a light shadow underneath um, most of the things that I paint to anchor them. So we're going to anchor this with a pale. This is a little bit of Moon Glow by Daniel Smith, which is a very nice, very light purple with some pink and blue, a gradiating purple. And a little bit under the leaf or the pine needles. It doesn't have to be dark at all. It can be very light. And I'm going to put a little bit more, making it look like there's a table back there. And now we take the tape off. I'm speeding this up because I'm painfully slow with a pen. We're going to go around it with a gold pen to give it a little shape. And we're getting to the very end of this. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear in the comments below if you did this and if you enjoyed it. And I hope you have a very Merry Christmas. I'm going to finish this with taking just a red pen and writing in Merry Christmas. And that'll do it for today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining me.